I've looked for quite a few years at the German occupation policy in Lithuania, between 1941 to 1944. Only 3 years, which cost with a number of victims of about 420,000. Over 200,000 Jews, about 170,000 Soviet prisoners of war, about 5,000 from other groups, like partisan fighters, Russian civilians, Polish civilians, gypsies, mentally retarded, mentally disabled, I mean. But a huge number for a small country of 3 million. Now, the opening of the archives in Eastern Europe in the 90s enabled us to have a much more closer look at what happened there, and actually for the first time to reconstruct and analyze in a detailed way what happened, and going from there to the question, why did it happen? Now, I will explain that in a minute. Let me make a first remark on the general assumption about when people hear about Lithuania during World War II. The first thing that comes to the mind is the pogroms at the beginning in the first week of the war, which are very well known because we have photos from German Nazis of Lithuanians attacking Jews in a very brutal way. And we have the legend from the German security police in their reports, which must be analyzed as wishful thinking. Lithuanians by themselves have attacked the Jews, and therefore the inner logic was, if they do that and we do it in a more orderly way, it will be much easier to legitimize a much more systematic violence, which was planned in a way. So, for a couple of years, me, Lithuanian colleagues, Jewish colleagues, Israeli colleagues, we have sort of plowed through the archives in the whole of Lithuania, went through all the provinces and the cities to find the cases where Lithuanians attacked Jews before the Germans even were at the specific place, because it's such a common topic, and we didn't find them. We did not find these places. We did find many places single violent deeds, single murders even, single rapes, robbery, arrests, beatings, public humiliation, but we did not find pogroms of the sort we are used to think of a big number of Jews being attacked by Lithuanian mob and being killed. During this research process, we how should I put it? We were able to detail the schedule of the Germans connecting to Lithuanians in such a precise way that for this most important pogrom we know of in Kovno in the first week of the war, we even know the hours when the Germans talked to the specific Lithuanians who were then ready to actually participate in these pogroms, meaning the Lithuanians did not attack the Jews before the Germans were in. Unfortunately, from a German perspective, it was us again who did this. Yeah, not only in Kaunas, in Kovno, but in the provinces as well. Yeah. The German framework for this first few weeks of the war was such that it was part of the so-called decapitation policy of the Soviet Union, based on the Polish model. We Germans must win this war very quickly. We need to be finished in September. And one way to accelerate the process of winning the war, is to decapitate the Soviet society from the beginning, with the first onslaught. And that's why we Germans want to kill all communists, all party members, and being anti-Semites, all the Jewish men we can get hold of, and which are capable of potential resistance. Not of actual resistance, but of potential resistance. It was a drastic, extreme anti-Semitic terror policy which was conducted during the first few weeks, That's why we don't hardly have women and children, and Jewish women and children under the victims during the first few weeks of the occupation. Later on, we also do not find practiced Lithuanian initiative says that the Lithuanians were worse than the Germans. Went through all the counties and the cities, and it was, again, I must say, we are to blame. We Germans are to blame for this. It doesn't change the moral question for the Lithuanians, because many of them did actually participate and executed the murder, but they were not the brains behind it. The brains and the commanders were Germans, either from the civil administration or the police, and in part even from the labor office, for example, Deutschen Arbeitsamt. So, because this is such a common assumption, it's I think it's important to revise this and to adapt what we think to the actual historical facts, what we know based on sources. Let me shortly explain the approach, the concept I try to pursue in the study on Lithuania. It's a very thick book. It's 1,600 pages, and that's main reason for this is that it's a very comprehensive approach. There are two triangles which I try to, which I'm actually adapting to the material. The first one is that the question of mass crimes against the Jews, against the prisoners of war, against other civilian groups, need to be analyzed within the context of the warfare, of the conduct of war, and in the context of the German occupation policy. We always need, when you ask why did this happen at this point of time, at this place, in order to identify that, we need to ask how is the state of the warfare, how did the Germans perceive it at that point of time, and how is it linked to the occupation policy? Why are both notions so important, both issues so important, war and occupation policy? The war, because the Germans were not the masters they pretended to be. Yeah? So, there was a major turning point in the summer of '41 that we, the Germans, are under enormous pressure. We are losing the strategic initiative in this war. And that means a repeat of 1918. And the whole Nazi project is based on an avoidance of a second 1918, the notion of Volksgemeinschaft, people's community, and the notion, which was then very important during World War II, Europe as a fortress. Yeah? These two notions, Volksgemeinschaft and Europe as a fortress, coined the Nazi value system. What do we need to do? How do we decide what? If these two projects are sort of eased by what we do, then it's a good idea to do that. If it harms them, then it's a bad idea. Occupation policy is important. Why? Because the Germans had enormous and underestimated scarcity of personnel. Yeah? They were completely overstretching their empire, and they really depended on non-German collaboration and cooperation. I avoid the term collaboration because it's always linked to courts, and historians should not be judges. We should try to find out what happened and why, and not judge people. Yeah? So the term cooperation is better because it takes it out of this judicial context, yeah? And allows us to approach the whole topic more neutral. And then judge in hindsight morally, yeah? But not as judges, no? But as human beings. So the Germans depend on non-German cooperation. And because the pressure on the Germans was so high, they always had to decide whom do we support and whom do we not support. Basic line of German policy is always one of selection. Yeah? We don't feed those in order to feed them. Yeah? There was actually, there were deliberations in the middle of July 1941 to starve all the Baltic peoples. But it was said, no, we're not going to do that, even though it was not planned before. But there was this sort of, maybe we need to do this, because the war wasn't going as well as they thought it would. No, we're going to starve Soviet prisoners instead and incarcerate the Jews in ghettos as far as possible, instead of, and then give the food instead to Lithuanians and let them have it. Yeah, a section principle is always working here. It's always at work here. The second triangle I want to explain shortly is that I try to look at this history from three different perspectives: the German ones, the Lithuanian ones, and the Jewish ones. And each one, of course, is not one perspective. There are always several perspectives to this. And to span that from over the whole, to pursue this project over the whole time span, 41 through to 44, because situations are changing rapidly. So I've tried to explain a bit on the German side. Now, the Lithuanian point of reference all the time was 1940, June 1940, when they lost, this young sovereign Lithuanian nation state lost its sovereignty to the Soviet Union because it was occupied. And especially the younger generations of Lithuanians was so angry about this, that this happened. And they blamed their own weak leadership, the conservative Lithuanians like Smetona, who was a dictator actually, beginning from 1926. And they were so angry. And from this group of angry young men in the police, in policy, in the administration, came actually the most extreme collaborators with the Germans. They are the core group of Lithuanian politicians and policemen who conducted who were convinced that the mass crimes are good for the future of the Lithuanian state, which will then later be built without Jews, without communists, without Poles, without Russians. Yeah. Why with the Germans? In 1918, the first Lithuanian nation state was built against the Germans, under German cover. Yeah? So again, 1918 is important here, but most important point is 1940. The Jewish side. The Jewish side does not have a fixed point where we can say, okay, everything they do is related to this date or to this date or to this event, because the Jews in Lithuania, as in the whole region, were immediately confronted with the question of survival. How to survive? Immediately. There was no time to react collectively, no time to think even. It was just survive this for a couple of weeks or months till the storm is over, and then we'll see. I try to use contemporary sources as much as possible in reconstructing the different Jewish perspectives. And there's not one Jewish perspective, there are different ones. And I believe what unites them is we can sort of get a clue of what unites them using Lawrence Langer's term choiceless choices. It's paradoxical. They were forced to make choices all the time, each and every one of them, and permanently. But really there was no choice. It was only among evils. And no matter which perspective you look at, whether you go from the Jewish council, the Jewish police, the Jewish family father, the Jewish child, the mother, the young partisan fighter, or the boy that just tries to survive in the woods, they always had to make decisions which were morally not solvable. Yeah. And this is very important, I think, to understand the situation that those Jews were in. What we learn from the contemporary sources is actually that the main emotional reaction is of Jews in the ghetto and outside the ghetto is to try not to feel anything, to be numb. There was no time to mourn. Yeah? Just go on, to pretend it's normal. And this sort of this parallel of normalcy, we have to live normally if we want to survive, and the permanent terror threat, or even threat of destruction, is very important, which links to this notion of choiceless choices. All those who still had surviving families, the notion to care for the family is the most important one. This goes a bit against those grand narratives of this was a Jewish national story, or from the Soviet side this is a communist story of the people against somebody. No, what you learn from the sources is survival of the family is the most important cornerstone in the value system. That is what is important. And everything that serves that is sort of legitimate, and everything that doesn't serve that is even more difficult to do. So those two triangles are the cornerstone of this study: mass crimes, war, conduct of war, occupation policy, and to combine that with the three different perspectives, which are then not always only one, the German one, the Lithuanian one, the Jewish one, and to see that through the whole period, based on sources. The book is also so weighty, so long, because I had to reconstruct what happened. I couldn't say, okay, we know what happened from that and that and that, but it was sort of just to narrate what happened actually was very important. And then to ask, why did it happen? Because the why depends on the how. When you know the how, we get many clues for the why, not the other way around.